Hey there, and welcome back to Edit My Photo for 2021. When photographing fast and randomly moving subjects like dogs, you simply must use a fast shutter speed. Unfortunately, this means using a higher ISO to compensate. Knowing how to deal with the resulting noise is an essential skill for pet photographers. And in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how I deal with noise using Adobe Lightroom. Feel free to follow along with this tutorial from start to finish, or you can fast track through the video using the chapter links below. If you do find yourself enjoying this video, make sure you take a moment to subscribe. That way you'll never miss any of my pet photography shooting and editing videos in the future. Hi, I'm Charlotte Reeves from Learn Pet Photography, and you've tuned into episode 6 of Edit My Photo. Jennifer was the winner of this month's Edit My Photo challenge. I run these challenges monthly in my Facebook group for Learn Pet Photography, which is now open to all Learn Pet Photography students. For this challenge, my students requested a particular type of file from me. They wanted to see a high ISO underexposed image from my new Canon R5. So this is exactly what I delivered. This shot of rescue dog Woolie was taken for the annual Peninsula Animal calendar that I shoot every year for this rescue organisation. Out of all the submissions, I chose Jennifer's edit because I absolutely love the way that she thought outside the box and added a twilight flare into the background of the shot. Really cool idea. As the winner of the challenge, Jennifer submitted this image to me to edit. So this image actually ties in beautifully because number one, it's from the new Canon R6, which a lot of people are interested in seeing the files from. And it's also shot at high ISO and underexposed a little bit. So I can use it to demonstrate exactly how I deal with noise and sharpness in Adobe Lightroom. So for this episode, this will just be a very quick Lightroom edit. Watch all the way to the end to see the finished result, or you can fast track using the chapter links below. And as always, I welcome your questions and any feedback you might have in the comments. Okay, so before we dive into this edit, I just want to make a quick comment on the composition of this image. So whenever you have a dog looking off to the side or the subject looking off to the side in a photo, it's always good to include a little bit of extra negative space on the side that they're looking into. And Jennifer has done that perfectly in this image. So straight out of camera, the framing is excellent. So just looking at the histogram here. So the histogram actually tells us, well, it backs up what we can see with our eyes looking at the photo, I guess. So looking at the photo, it does look a bit dark. And when we look at the histogram, we can see that the tones are mostly gathered towards the left-hand side of the histogram. This sort of indicates that most of the tones in the image are quite dark. There are some lighter tones coming through here, but the image is definitely a little underexposed. Now, when an image has been underexposed and it's been shot at a reasonably high ISO, you do have to be careful when bringing back detail into those shadowed areas because you do end up with quite a bit of noise, and that's what we're mostly going to be dealing with here. So because it's quite obvious that it's underexposed, I'm going to just take that exposure slider up straight away, probably to around there. And then I also want to deal with the white balance. So the white balance actually isn't too bad, but I think I'm going to make it just a little bit warmer. And also maybe add a little bit of magenta, because you find when you do add warmth, the image does end up looking a little bit green, especially with Canon files, it seems. Next up, I'm going to head to the tone sliders here. So we're going to be definitely taking the shadow slider across. This will help bring back detail into the darkest areas. I'm going to take the white slider up because that's a really good way of getting contrast back, especially in an image that's a little bit flat. And you'll see that that really pushes those tones up towards the right hand side of the histogram, so we can get some nice light tones in the image as well. Take that up there. We don't want to take that up too much because it's going to start pushing those tones up against the right hand side, and that's going to end up blowing out highlights. So you see, if I take that up too far, that's what's going to happen. So we want to take this down to a nice manageable level where it's bright but not overly exposed. And you can always press J on the keyboard, and that will give you an overlay on the image of any clipped shadows or clipped highlights. At the moment, we're only seeing clipped shadows, which is fine, which is what you would expect with this image. We can't see any clipped highlights. If I take that white slider up more, you'll start seeing that red overlay, and that is indicating clipped highlights. So we don't want to go up that far. We want to just back it off a little bit from there. Just going to press J again to turn that overlay off. So because we filled the shadows so much, we will need to take that black slider down a little bit just to counterbalance that so we don't end up having grey looking blacks, which can definitely happen. And then I'm also just going to take that highlight slider down a little, and that will sort of help offset any issues caused by the white slider being used. So generally I'm balancing my highlights with my whites and my shadows with my blacks. So already we've got a pretty good result just from using those basic tone sliders. So that's the before and that's the after. So at this point we really start to notice the noise creeping in. I'm just going to click to zoom into 100% and you will see some noise, especially in that background. Generally when there's areas of graduated tone, that's where you see the noise the most. Areas of detail do tend to hide noise, so sharpness often hides noise, but when you've got a nice sort of flat graduated area of tone, that's where it's most noticeable. So at this stage, I'm going to actually create a history snapshot. I'm going to call it pre-noise reduction. Just so I can quickly and easily switch back to this so we can see the changes that we've made when we do the noise reduction. Okay, so let's dive into this noise reduction. So if we go down to the detail panel here, you'll see we've got a sharpening section and a noise reduction section. Now, there are 4 different sliders for sharpening. I tend to only use 3 of them because detail I do not find makes a huge amount of difference, and there's probably not much point in messing with the slider if you can't really see a lot of visual difference. So I tend to just sort of leave that one alone. So sharpness wise, well, let's go with noise reduction first actually. So those are the sharpening sliders. We'll come back to those because you always want to balance sharpening with noise reduction. Those two things offset each other and work together. So noise reduction wise, let's take the luminance noise reduction slider up. And you will start to see the background smoothing out quite a lot. Now I'm zoomed into 100%. I'm actually going to zoom into 300%. Well, let's go 200%, which is more than I normally would, but it might make it a little bit easier to see on the video. So if I take that noise reduction slider down all the way, you'll see how that background gets really super crispy. If I take that noise reduction slider up, you'll see it starts to smooth out. And then take it up even further and it gets super smooth. But we don't want to take it up that far because the sharp areas of the image start getting a real plasticky kind of look. They look like they've been wrapped in cling wrap, which is not a good look. So we're not going to take the noise reduction up that far. We're probably going to leave it about, maybe about this sort of level, because I do have another trick up my sleeve to deal with that, specifically in the background. So I'm going to take the noise reduction only up to the point where it's not starting to negatively affect the sharp areas of the image. So I think that's probably about here. Now, it is sort of affecting those sharp areas a little bit, but that's when the sharpening adjustments that we're going to do are going to kick in. So under the sharpening here, I'm going to take the amount just up a little bit and then the radius up to about the same as the amount. Now that's just from experience. I know that that will give me a pretty good result. So that's helped to sharpen up those already sharp areas even more to kind of offset the noise reduction that we've done. Now, because adding that extra sharpening has actually gone backwards with the background, it's actually made it look a little bit more crispy. We don't want that. We're actually going to use the masking slider to deal with that. Now, a little trick. So I'm just going to hold the Option key on my keyboard down while moving this masking slider up. Now, it's going to give us a black and white overlay on the image. Black shows us the area that the sharpening is not going to apply to. White shows us the area the sharpening is going to apply to. So as you can see, the further we take this masking slider up, the less it's going to apply to the background, and the more it's just going to apply to areas that are kind of already sharp. So it's kind of doing a bit of an edge detection and then working out that it needs to apply the sharpening more to those areas. So I would probably, in this case, take that masking slider up to a point where the sharpening isn't really affecting the background, because that's undoing all that noise reduction we've just done. So I would probably take it up to about, probably about there. Now we've got a nice sharpening effect on the areas that we do want to be sharp. And I will just say too that this image is very nicely focused. So that eye and face is very sharp. So Jennifer's done a really good job of focusing in this image. So let's have a look, shall we, at our pre-noise reduction result and then have a look at this again. So let's go pre-noise reduction and then back to after the noise reduction and sharpening. So I'm just going to do that again. So this is before any noise reduction or sharpening, and this is after. So you'll really see the difference, not only in the noise reduction on the background, but also the sharpening on the dog's face as well. So I'm actually pretty happy with that result. Now, if you did feel like you wanted to do some additional noise reduction, specifically to the background to sort of help smooth out the background a little bit more, there is another way that you can do it. So you can use the adjustment brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire background. Let me just go in there and do that quickly. Okay, so now I have that background selected. I can actually turn off that overlay just by pressing the letter O on the keyboard. Now, this slider here, it's called a noise slider, and you would think taking a noise slider up would make it noisier, but it should actually be called a noise reduction slider, because if you take it up, it adds noise reduction. So I guess just semantics there. So let's have a look and see what kind of effect this has. So let's take that noise slider up. And I'm going to take it up a fair way so you can actually see the difference. You should be able to see that now. So let me just turn that off and on again. So that's off. You'll see it's a lot grainier in the background, and that's with the noise reduction on. So the background is a lot smoother. So we could probably also add some noise reduction to the out of focus areas like this ear here. And that would sort of help smooth that off too, but I'm not going to add a lot of it, so it probably doesn't matter too much. So I'm going to take that slider down to a point where, and to be honest, this image probably doesn't really need that much more noise reduction in the background. I mean, it was shot at ISO 2500 and we have lifted the shadows a bit, so it was pretty noisy, but the global adjustments we made for noise reduction did a pretty good job. So I'm just showing you this as an extra tool that you can use if you absolutely have to. So I'm just going to take the noise reduction up a little bit on the background. So something else that you can do here is also to add some extra sharpening to the face. If this image wasn't as perfectly focused as it is, this would be a little bit more important. So say the focus was slightly off, this would really help to get it nice and sharp again. But I'll show you anyway. So let's get the adjustment brush, and we're going to get a new brush. And instead, I'm just going to select this sort of general area here. So just the bits that should be sharp, basically, the face here. Turn that overlay off. And instead of taking the noise slider up, we're going to take the sharpness slider up. So if I take it right up, you can see how crispy, super sharp it gets, which we don't want it looking crunchy, so let's not take it up that far. So I'm just going to take that up just a little bit, just to illustrate the point, really. So those are two local adjustments that you can do to parts of the image if you need a bit of extra noise reduction or sharpening to get the image looking really spot on. So you might be wondering, what else can we do to this image? Well, there's a few little things that we can do. We can do what I call painting with light, which is using lightening and darkening selective over the image to kind of emphasize and de-emphasize certain parts of the image. So before I do that, I'm actually just going to go in and see if I can tweak the tones and colors a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit of extra clarity, add a bit of extra vibrance, because we've got some really pretty colors in the background, kind of autumn tones in the background there, which are quite nice. They're going to go into the tone curve and get a little bit of extra contrast out of the image. So I'm just going to take the lights up a little, the darks down a little, maybe take those highlights down. Press J on the keyboard to make sure I'm not blowing anything out. Nope, all looks pretty good. So that's a good way to get a little bit of extra contrast. I'm thinking it maybe still looks just a tiny little bit green. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit more tint. Play around with the temperature slider. I don't want to make it too warm because I think the light was naturally a little bit cooler in this. I'm going to leave that about there. Now, the whole painting with light thing. I think it would be nice to have a bit of a glow in the background. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do it in Lightroom, you can do it in Photoshop. Because we're doing this whole edit in Lightroom, let's have a look at it in Lightroom. So I'm going to grab the radial filter here and I'm going to draw a circle just behind the dog's head, a little bit over towards the center, maybe mostly focused on that where the color is in the background. We do want to try and keep it looking semi-natural, and I'm going to make some adjustments here. So I'm going to take the dehaze slider down. We also need to invert this, by the way, so that it applies inside the circle instead of outside the circle. So we just need to tick invert. So we want a bit of negative dehaze, which adds haze. We want to take the contrast down a bit, maybe the temperature up a little, just to make it look nice and warm. We also maybe want to take the shadows up a little bit, which also helps to decrease the amount of contrast that we've got. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to reposition that so it's mostly on the background there. Now, obviously we don't want it applying to the subject itself, so I will need to brush that effect back off the dog. And we need to do that fairly accurately because trying to brush it back in again after you've brushed it off often gives you like a halo effect around the edge. So I'm just going to go in with the brush in erase and leave auto mask off for now, and brush it off the majority. But for the edges, I'm going to turn auto mask on and zoom in and be a little bit more accurate with it, just to make sure we're not ending up with any haloing. So I think that's pretty much got it. Arguably this could be quicker to do in Photoshop using a different method, but it's still a good thing to know how to do in Lightroom if you need to. So let's turn that effect off and on again. And you see that spotlight effect we've got going on. It just adds a little extra element of interest to the image. I'm actually going to tone that back just a little bit, probably to around there. I think that's pretty good. So let's see what else we can do in terms of painting with light. So I'm going to actually add another radial filter, and I'm going to this time center it around the dog's face. And I'm going to add a bit of a spotlight effect to the front of the subject, so darken around the edges. Now you can add a vignette, but a vignette will add darkness around the edge of the image equally, whereas we want to make sure that the lightest part of the vignette is actually focused on the dog's face, which is off-center. So this is generally the best way to do it when you've got an off-center subject. So I'm just going to take that exposure down a little. I'm going to take the contrast down a little bit too, because that can be another way of helping the subject stand out, is have the subject be higher in contrast than the background, have the background look a little bit flatter. So I'm going to take the contrast down a bit, exposure down a little bit, and also take the shadows up a little and the highlights down, just to further decrease the contrast in the background there. So let's have a look at, and this is also going to give us the haze effect on the dog itself as well. It's going to give us both of those effects in action. So another thing I'm going to do is add a bit of darkness just from the bottom of the image up. So I'm just going to add a gradient there, and again just take that exposure down a touch just to darken off the bottom of the image so it takes the attention in towards the center. Now I'm thinking this image looks a little bit dark overall now, so I'm just going to adjust that exposure and do a few little tonal tweaks here to really get that subject standing out nicely. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. So let's have a look at the before image. Okay, so very dark, underexposed image, and the after image, which has definitely brightened it up. We've dealt with the noise, we've added some extra sharpness where we needed to, We've done a bit of painting with light, and it's really, I think, lifted the look of the image. So I'm pretty happy with that. So the only things that I would probably do if I were to take this image into Photoshop, I would look and see what I could do with the collar. It might be possible to get rid of that second collar there. It looks like a tick collar or a flea collar or something, and maybe these tags here. I would look at doing that. I would also just do a little bit of a clean up here underneath the chin. There's a bit of a greenish yellow color cast here, and a little bit of tear staining just here, and a bit of green under the chin that I would deal with. So there we have it, the finished image in Lightroom. I hope you've enjoyed this edit, and I really hope that you've picked up a few extra little tips and tricks for dealing with noise in Lightroom and balancing the noise with the sharpening. So if you have any questions or comments about this edit, please leave them in the comments and I shall get back to you. I hope you've enjoyed the edit, and I'll catch you next time. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. That would be awesome. Okay, bye.